The Pattern of a Life, From Chinatown to Fields Medal. The Extraordinary Life of Marcus Chen. Let me tell me about a boy named Marcus Chen, born on a rainy September morning in 1985 in a small apartment in San Francisco's Chinatown. His parents, first-generation immigrants from Taiwan, ran a modest noodle shop on Grant Avenue. Marcus entered the world 2 weeks early, and the doctor who delivered him later told his mother that he had never seen a newborn with such alert, observing eyes. Marcus's earliest memory, which he would carry with him throughout his entire life, was of sitting on the kitchen floor of their apartment at age 3, watching his mother's feet as she moved around preparing dinner. He remembered noticing the pattern of her movements, how she would take exactly 7 steps from the stove to the sink, pivot on her left foot, and reach for the cutting board with her right hand. Even at that young age, Marcus was already beginning to see patterns in everything around him. His childhood in Chinatown was filled with the sounds of multiple languages, the smell of incense from the temple down the street, and the constant bustle of tourists and locals moving through the narrow streets. Marcus's father, David Chen, worked 18-hour days at the noodle shop, while his mother, Susan, managed the accounts and took care of Marcus and his younger sister, Lily, who was born when Marcus was 4 years old. Marcus started showing unusual abilities early on. At age 4, he could already read simple books, not because his parents had pushed him, but because he had taught himself by observing the letters on street signs and in the newspapers his father read every morning. His mother discovered this one afternoon when Marcus casually read aloud an entire article from the San Francisco Chronicle about a local election. She had assumed he was just pretending, until she pointed to random words and he identified each one correctly. By the time Marcus entered kindergarten at the local public school, his teachers immediately noticed something different about him. While other children were learning to write their names and count to 20, Marcus was already doing addition and subtraction in his head and reading chapter books. His kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called his parents in for a meeting after just 2 weeks of school. She sat across from David and Susan Chen in the small classroom, surrounded by colorful alphabet posters and children's drawings, and said something that would change the trajectory of Marcus's life: "Your son is gifted. Exceptionally gifted. He needs more challenging material, or he's going to become bored and disengaged." But the Chen family didn't have the resources to send Marcus to a private school for gifted children. The noodle shop provided enough for them to live modestly, but there was no extra money for expensive tuition. So Marcus remained in public school, and his parents did their best to challenge him at home. His father, who had been an engineer in Taiwan before immigrating, began teaching Marcus advanced mathematics in the evenings after the shop closed. They would sit at the small kitchen table, the smell of the day's cooking still lingering in the air, and work through problems together. Marcus's relationship with his father during these years was complex. David Chen was a man of few words, someone who expressed love through actions rather than affection. He was hard on Marcus, always pushing him to work harder, to think deeper, to never settle for a simple answer when a better one existed. Sometimes Marcus would struggle with a problem, his young mind exhausted from school and the additional studying, and he would see disappointment flicker across his father's face. Those moments hurt Marcus deeply, implanting in him a drive to never disappoint anyone, a drive that would fuel his accomplishments but also haunt him in quieter moments throughout his life. When Marcus was 7 years old, something happened that revealed just how different his mind was. The Chen family had gone to Golden Gate Park for a rare Sunday outing. While his parents sat on a bench watching Lily play on the swings, Marcus wandered over to where a street chess player had set up several boards, playing multiple games simultaneously against different opponents. Marcus watched for nearly an hour, completely mesmerized. He didn't know the rules of chess, had never seen the game before, but he was captivated by the patterns of movement, the way each piece had its own logic and limitations. The chess player, an elderly man named Bernard who had been playing in the park for 30 years, noticed the small Asian boy standing motionless at the edge of his games, studying the boards with an intensity unusual for a child. During a break between matches, Bernard called Marcus over and asked if he wanted to learn. Marcus nodded eagerly. Bernard spent the next 30 minutes explaining the basic rules, showing Marcus how each piece moved, the objective of the game, the concept of check and checkmate. Then Bernard set up a board and invited Marcus to play. He expected to win easily, of course, perhaps giving the boy some pointers along the way, being patient with the obvious mistakes a first-time player would make. But something extraordinary happened. Marcus, playing his very first game of chess, managed to last 23 moves before Bernard checkmated him. For a complete beginner, for a 7-year-old child playing against someone who had devoted his life to the game, this was remarkable. Bernard was so surprised that he insisted on another game. The second game lasted 31 moves. By the third game, Marcus was seeing combinations, setting up simple tactics, beginning to understand the deeper strategic layer beneath the surface moves. Bernard gave Marcus his card and told his parents that their son had an exceptional gift for chess. He offered to teach Marcus for free, every Sunday in the park, if they would bring him. David and Susan agreed, seeing this as another avenue to develop their son's obvious talents. And so began Marcus's chess education. Though he would eventually leave the game behind, it taught him something crucial about his own mind. He could see patterns and possibilities that others couldn't. He could hold complex systems in his head and manipulate them, finding solutions that seemed to emerge from the patterns themselves. School remained easy for Marcus, almost trivially so. He moved through elementary school getting perfect grades without much effort, which created its own problems. His teachers didn't know what to do with him. Some tried to challenge him with additional work, but often this was just more of the same level of material, which didn't help. Marcus learned to hide his abilities somewhat, to not always raise his hand even when he knew the answer, to occasionally pretend to struggle with material he found simple. He had learned that being too different, too far ahead, made other children uncomfortable around him. He wanted friends, wanted to fit in, even as his mind was operating on a different level than his peers. His social life during these years was complicated. Marcus was kind and generally well liked, but he always felt somewhat apart from the other children. While they talked about cartoons and toys, Marcus was thinking about mathematical proofs and chess strategies. He learned to code switch, to talk about the things other kids cared about even if they didn't particularly interest him. He developed a skill for listening, for asking questions that got other people talking about themselves, which made him seem like a good friend even when he felt like an observer from the outside. There was one friend, though, who Marcus connected with genuinely during elementary school. His name was Jamal Williams, and he lived 3 blocks away from the Chen's apartment. Jamal wasn't gifted like Marcus, didn't have the same kind of intellectual abilities, but he had something else, emotional intelligence and creativity. Jamal could draw anything, could make up stories on the spot that had Marcus laughing until his sides hurt. The two boys were inseparable from 3rd grade through 5th grade, spending afternoons exploring Chinatown, creating elaborate imaginary worlds where they were heroes on important missions. Jamal never seemed bothered by Marcus's intelligence, never seemed to feel threatened or diminished by it. Years later, Marcus would realize that Jamal had taught him something crucial about human connection, that true friendship isn't about matching abilities but about mutual respect and genuine affection. When Marcus was 10 years old, his life changed dramatically. A teacher at his school, Mr. Patterson, who had been observing Marcus throughout 4th grade, nominated him for a program run by a local university that identified gifted children from underserved communities and provided them with enrichment opportunities. Marcus went through a series of tests, interviews, and evaluations. The results were extraordinary. His IQ tested at 162, in the 99.99th percentile. His spatial reasoning, mathematical ability, and verbal comprehension were all at the highest measurable levels. The program accepted Marcus immediately and offered him a full scholarship to attend weekend and summer courses at the university, where he would be taught by professors and mixed with other highly gifted children from across the Bay Area. This opportunity thrilled Marcus but also terrified him. He would be leaving behind the familiar world of his neighborhood school, entering an environment where everyone was exceptional. He worried he wouldn't measure up, that he would be exposed as not really that special after all. His first day in the program, Marcus walked into a classroom at the university and saw about 20 other kids around his age, all of them there because they were considered gifted. The professor, Dr. Elena Vasquez, who would become one of the most important mentors in Marcus's life, started the class with a challenging problem in number theory. She put it on the board and told the students to work on it in small groups. Marcus found himself grouped with two other children, a girl named Sarah Goldstein who was from a wealthy family in Pacific Heights and had already been taking advanced courses since she was 6, and a boy named Raj Patel whose parents were both doctors and who seemed to know more about science than Marcus had ever imagined possible. Marcus felt overwhelmed at first. These kids seemed so confident, so knowledgeable, so far ahead of him. But then he looked at the problem on the board, really looked at it, and he began to see the patterns within it. His mind started working through the possibilities, testing approaches, discarding dead ends. Within 15 minutes, his group had solved the problem, with Marcus contributing the key insight that unlocked the solution. Sarah looked at him with new respect, and Raj asked him how he had seen that approach. Marcus tried to explain, but he realized he didn't fully understand his own process. The solution had simply emerged from looking at the patterns long enough. That first semester in the gifted program was one of the most intellectually stimulating periods of Marcus's young life. He was finally around other kids who thought the way he did, who got excited about ideas and problems and discoveries. He learned about advanced mathematics, computer programming, physics, philosophy, and literature. Dr. Vasquez became his particular champion, recognizing in Marcus not just intelligence but a creative, intuitive approach to problem solving that couldn't be taught. She began giving him graduate-level problems to work on, and Marcus would return the following week with solutions that sometimes surprised even her. But this period also highlighted something Marcus had been feeling for years, the gap between his intellectual life and his emotional life. While his mind raced ahead, exploring complex ideas and abstract concepts, emotionally he was still a 10-year-old boy who missed his friend Jamal, who felt guilty that he was spending his weekends at the university instead of helping at his parents' restaurant, who sometimes just wanted to play video games and not think about anything challenging at all. His relationship with his sister Lily also became more complicated during this time. Lily was a bright child, but not gifted in the way Marcus was. She was creative and socially adept, popular at school, good at sports and music. As Marcus received more attention for his abilities, Lily began to feel overlooked. Their parents, especially their father, focused so much energy on nurturing Marcus's gifts that Lily sometimes felt invisible. Marcus noticed this and felt guilty about it, but he didn't know how to fix it. He tried to spend time with Lily, to play with her and help her with homework, but there was always another problem to solve, another concept to master, another expectation to meet. When Marcus was 12, he entered middle school, which was a difficult transition. Middle school is hard for almost everyone, but it was particularly challenging for Marcus. His intellectual abilities, which had always set him apart, now made him a target. Kids at that age can be cruel, and being known as the genius made Marcus subject to teasing and bullying. Other boys would mock him for being a nerd, would knock his books out of his hands in the hallway, would exclude him from their social groups. Girls, for the most part, ignored him entirely, focused on the more popular, athletic boys. Marcus retreated further into his intellectual pursuits. He dove deeper into mathematics, beginning to work on problems at an undergraduate level. He taught himself multiple programming languages and started building software applications just for fun. He read voraciously, everything from classic literature to modern physics textbooks. His weekend classes at the university became his refuge, the one place where being smart was an asset rather than a liability. But Dr. Vasquez noticed that something had changed in Marcus. The spark of joy he had shown when first joining the program had dimmed. He was still brilliant, still solving problems and producing exceptional work, but he seemed withdrawn, unhappy. She pulled him aside one Saturday after class and asked him what was wrong. Marcus, who had been holding everything inside for months, finally broke down and told her about the bullying, about feeling like he didn't fit in anywhere, about the pressure he felt to keep performing at a high level while just wanting to be a normal kid sometimes. Dr. Vasquez told Marcus something that day that he would remember for the rest of his life. She said, "Marcus, the gifts you have come with a price. You see the world differently than most people, and that creates a distance between you and them. That distance can feel lonely, and sometimes it is lonely. But your gifts also allow you to contribute things to the world that no one else can. The question you have to answer for yourself is, what will you do with these abilities? Will you hide them to fit in, or will you develop them to make a difference? There's no wrong answer, but you need to make that choice consciously." Marcus thought about this conversation for months. He realized that he had been trying to be two different people, the gifted student on weekends and the kid trying to be normal during the week. This divided existence was exhausting and ultimately unsustainable. He made a decision, at age 13, to stop hiding his abilities. He would be who he was, and if that meant some people didn't like him, so be it. This decision was both liberating and isolating. He lost some of the tentative social connections he had been maintaining, but he also stopped feeling like he was constantly performing a role. His reputation at school shifted. Instead of just being the smart kid who gets bullied, he became known as the person to go to if you needed help understanding something. Marcus discovered that he enjoyed teaching, explaining concepts in ways that made them accessible to others. He started tutoring other students in math and science, which gave him a social role that felt authentic. He wasn't trying to be popular, he was just being himself and helping others, and somehow that made him more accepted than all his previous attempts to fit in. During 8th grade, something happened that would set the course for Marcus's future. There was a national mathematics competition for middle school students, and Mr. Patterson, who was still teaching at Marcus's school and still following his progress, encouraged Marcus to enter. The competition involved several rounds, starting with a written test, then advancing to regional and national levels. Marcus worked through the preliminary test easily, scoring a perfect result. The regional competition was held at Stanford University, and Marcus traveled there with Mr. Patterson on a Saturday morning. He competed against the best young mathematicians from across Northern California, and the problems were genuinely challenging, the first time Marcus had encountered mathematics problems that he couldn't solve immediately. He had to think deeply, try different approaches, work through the logic systematically. It was exhilarating. He finished the regional competition in second place, which qualified him for nationals. The national competition was held in Washington, D.C. that summer. Marcus's parents couldn't afford to send him, but the gifted program at the university raised funds to cover his travel and accommodation. It was Marcus's first time on an airplane, his first time leaving California. He was both excited and terrified. The competition was held over 3 days, with increasingly difficult problems each day. Marcus found himself competing against students from across the country, many of them from elite private schools with extensive preparation for these kinds of competitions. The problems on the final day were at a level Marcus had never encountered. They required not just technical skill but creative insights, the ability to see connections between different areas of mathematics. Marcus worked through them methodically, his mind fully engaged, time disappearing as he focused completely on the elegant structures of mathematical logic before him. When the competition ended, he had no idea how he had performed. The problems had been so difficult that he felt like he had probably made mistakes. The awards ceremony was held that evening in a large auditorium. They announced the winners in reverse order, starting with 10th place and working up. When they got to 3rd place and Marcus's name hadn't been called, he felt a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Could he have actually finished in the top 2? 2nd place was announced, a girl from New York named Amy Chen, no relation, who had been preparing for this competition with private tutors for years. And then they announced 1st place, Marcus Chen from San Francisco, California. Marcus walked up to the stage in a daze. He accepted the trophy, a large gold-colored cup that felt heavy in his hands, and shook hands with the organizers. The audience applauded, but Marcus barely heard it. All he could think was, "I did it. I competed against the best young mathematicians in the country, and I won." For a boy who had often felt out of place, who had struggled to find where he belonged, this victory validated something essential about who he was. His abilities weren't just useful for getting good grades or impressing teachers, they could allow him to compete and excel at the highest levels. The victory at Nationals changed things for Marcus. He returned to San Francisco with a new confidence, a new sense of his own potential. The local news ran a story about him, "Chinatown teen wins national math competition," which made his parents proud and brought more attention to the noodle shop. His father, who rarely showed emotion, hugged Marcus tightly when he got home and told him in Mandarin that he was proud of him. His mother cried happy tears. Even Lily seemed impressed, telling her friends at school that her brother was famous. High school started a few months later, and Marcus entered with a reputation. The math and science teachers at the public high school he attended knew about his abilities and his national competition victory. They bent the rules to allow him to skip ahead in coursework, letting him take AP Calculus as a freshman when it was normally reserved for seniors. Marcus also continued his weekend program at the university, now taking courses that were technically graduate level, studying topics like abstract algebra, real analysis, and topology. But high school wasn't just about academics for Marcus. He was growing, changing, becoming a young man. At 14, he was physically small for his age, still baby-faced and thin. He hit puberty later than many of his peers, which added another layer of self-consciousness to the social challenges of high school. While other boys were dating and going to parties, Marcus was working through problem sets and studying advanced mathematics. There was one girl, though, who caught Marcus's attention during his freshman year. Her name was Emily Tran, and she was a senior, about to graduate. She was the editor of the school newspaper and had written a profile about Marcus and his mathematics competition victory. She came to interview him during his lunch period, sitting across from him in the cafeteria with a notebook and a warm smile. She asked him thoughtful questions, not just about math but about his life, his interests beyond academics, his dreams for the future. Marcus found himself telling Emily things he hadn't told anyone else. He talked about the loneliness of being different, about his complicated relationship with his gifts, about how he sometimes resented the expectations everyone had for him. Emily listened without judgment, taking notes but also just being present with him in the conversation. At the end of the interview, she thanked him and said something that stuck with him, "You know, Marcus, you're not just a brain. You're a person with a fascinating story. Don't let anyone, including yourself, reduce you to just your abilities." The profile Emily wrote was thoughtful and nuanced, capturing not just Marcus's intellectual achievements but also his humanity. For the first time, Marcus saw himself reflected in a way that felt complete. Emily graduated a few months later and went off to college at Berkeley. Marcus never told her that he had a crush on her, that her kindness and insight had meant more to him than she probably realized. But he kept the newspaper with her article about him, folded carefully in his desk drawer, throughout high school. Marcus's sophomore year brought new challenges. He had exhausted most of the advanced courses available at his high school, so the university program arranged for him to take actual undergraduate courses at the university, not just the enrichment classes but real courses alongside college students. At 15 years old, Marcus found himself sitting in lecture halls with people 3, 4, 5 years older than him, taking notes on differential equations and linear algebra. Most of the college students ignored him, probably assuming he was someone's younger sibling sitting in on a class. But one of his professors, Dr. Michael Brennan, who taught a course on mathematical logic, recognized Marcus's unusual talent. Dr. Brennan had been a prodigy himself, earning his Ph.D. at age 23, and he saw something of his younger self in Marcus. He began mentoring Marcus, giving him independent study projects, introducing him to other faculty members, helping him navigate the strange position of being a high school student taking university-level courses. Dr. Brennan also introduced Marcus to research mathematics, showing him that math wasn't just about solving problems but about discovering new mathematical truths, proving theorems that no one had proved before. Marcus was fascinated by this idea. Dr. Brennan gave him a research problem to work on, something in graph theory that had applications to computer science. The problem had been open for several years, with various mathematicians making partial progress but no one finding a complete solution. Marcus worked on this problem obsessively for months. He covered pages and pages with diagrams and equations, trying different approaches, hitting dead ends, starting over. This was different from any mathematics he had done before. There was no answer key, no way to check if he was on the right track. He had to rely entirely on his own reasoning, his own insights. There were nights when he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind churning through possibilities, unable to sleep because he was so focused on finding the solution. And then, one afternoon in the spring of his sophomore year, sitting in the kitchen of his family's apartment while his mother cooked dinner and his sister did homework at the same table, Marcus saw it. The solution emerged suddenly, all at once, as if it had been there waiting for him to notice it. He grabbed his notebook and began writing furiously, working through the proof, checking each step, making sure the logic held. It did. He had solved an open research problem at age 16. Dr. Brennan was astonished when Marcus showed him the solution. He checked the proof carefully, looking for errors, but it was solid. He helped Marcus write up the result as a proper academic paper, teaching him the conventions and style of mathematical writing. They submitted the paper to a respected journal in graph theory. 6 months later, after peer review, the paper was accepted. Marcus Chen, at age 16, had published original mathematical research in a peer-reviewed journal. This publication brought Marcus to the attention of mathematicians and computer scientists around the world. He started receiving emails from researchers who wanted to discuss his work, from universities interested in recruiting him. Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Princeton, all of them reached out, offering to discuss admission even though Marcus was still in high school. His parents were overwhelmed by all the attention and opportunities, not quite sure how to navigate this world of elite higher education that was so far from their own experiences. Junior year of high school was strange for Marcus. On paper, he was a junior at his public high school in San Francisco, but in reality, he was taking all his academic courses at the university and only going to his high school for things like PE and electives. He had essentially graduated from high school level material and was working his way through an undergraduate mathematics education while still technically being a high school student. Socially, he existed in a weird liminal space. He wasn't really part of the high school social scene anymore, but he also wasn't quite part of the university culture. The college students still saw him as a kid, even though he was performing at their level or higher academically. Marcus often felt caught between worlds, not quite fitting in anywhere, though he was beginning to accept this as simply part of his reality. His relationship with his family also evolved during this time. His parents were proud of him, but there was also a distance growing between them. They couldn't really understand what he was studying or what his future opportunities meant. His father still wanted to talk to him about the noodle shop sometimes, hinting that maybe Marcus could use his business sense and intelligence to help expand the restaurant, maybe turn it into a chain. Marcus didn't have the heart to tell his father that he had no interest in the restaurant business, that his mind was focused on abstract mathematics and the frontiers of human knowledge. His relationship with Lily became more complicated too. She was in middle school now, navigating her own challenges, and Marcus, caught up in his academic pursuits, wasn't always there for her the way she needed. There was one night when Lily came to him crying because she was being bullied at school for not being as smart as her genius brother. Marcus felt a wave of guilt wash over him. His gifts, which had brought him opportunities and recognition, had become a burden for his sister. He held her and apologized, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for exactly, just a general sense that his exceptionalism had somehow caused her pain. As junior year turned to senior year, Marcus had to make a decision about college. He had been accepted to every school he had applied to, all of them offering full scholarships and special programs for exceptional students. MIT offered him a place in their Ph.D. program in mathematics, despite the fact that he hadn't even officially finished his bachelor's degree yet. Harvard offered a similar arrangement. Stanford wanted to keep him close to home and offered him a position as both an undergraduate and a graduate student simultaneously, which would allow him to complete both degrees in an accelerated time frame. Marcus visited several of these schools. He walked through the hallways where some of the greatest minds in mathematics and science had walked before him. He sat in on classes, met with professors, tried to imagine himself in each place. In the end, he chose MIT, drawn by its intensity, by the concentration of brilliant minds all pushing the boundaries of their fields, by the culture that seemed to value innovation and intellectual risk-taking above all else. His parents didn't really understand why he was choosing a school so far away when Stanford was right there in California, but they supported his decision. His father seemed sad that Marcus would be leaving, though he expressed the sadness through practical concerns about the weather in Boston and whether Marcus would remember to wear warm clothes in the winter. His mother cried when they talked about it, proud and heartbroken at the same time. Lily, now 13, tried to act like she didn't care that her brother was leaving, but Marcus could see through the facade to the sadness underneath. Marcus graduated from high school at 17, technically on time with his original class even though he had been taking university courses for years. He walked across the stage at the graduation ceremony held in the school gym, accepting his diploma while his family cheered from the bleachers. He had been named valedictorian, of course, and gave a short speech about pursuing your passions and not being afraid to be different. Looking back later, he would recognize the irony that he was giving advice about self-acceptance while still struggling with many of those same issues himself. The summer before college was bittersweet. Marcus spent time with his family, helped out at the noodle shop, spent long afternoons with Jamal, who was still his closest friend despite their different paths. Jamal was planning to go to community college and study graphic design, pursuing his artistic talents. They talked about their futures, about how strange it was that they were becoming adults, about staying in touch even though they would be on opposite sides of the country. There was a goodbye party at the noodle shop the week before Marcus left for MIT. Friends, family, teachers, people from the neighborhood, they all came to celebrate Marcus and wish him well. Mr. Patterson was there, emotional as he told Marcus how proud he was of what Marcus had accomplished. Dr. Vasquez came, bringing Marcus a book about famous mathematicians as a going-away present. Bernard, the chess player from the park who had first taught Marcus the game all those years ago, showed up with a beautiful hand-carved chess set as a gift, telling Marcus that the ability to think several moves ahead would serve him well in life, not just in chess. Marcus stood in the restaurant that night, surrounded by people who had shaped his childhood and adolescence, feeling a profound mixture of excitement and sadness. He was leaving behind everything familiar, heading into an unknown future. He was ready for it, hungry for the challenges ahead, but also scared in a way he hadn't expected. When Marcus arrived at MIT in September, a month after his 17th birthday, he felt immediately that he had made the right choice. The campus hummed with intellectual energy. Everyone there was exceptional in some way, and for the first time in his life, Marcus didn't feel like an outlier. Being gifted, being obsessed with learning, being eager to solve hard problems, these were the norm here, not the exception. He moved into his dorm room, a small single in one of the undergraduate halls. His roommate situation had been somewhat complicated by the fact that he was both an undergraduate and a graduate student, but the administration had decided he should live with the undergrads for the social experience, at least for his first year. His room was sparse: a bed, a desk, a small window looking out onto the Cambridge campus. He unpacked his few belongings, set up his laptop, and pinned a photo of his family to the corkboard above his desk. Marcus's first semester was intense. He was taking graduate-level courses in mathematics while also fulfilling some undergraduate requirements in other subjects. He took a seminar on algebraic geometry with some of the top Ph.D. students in the mathematics department. He took a course on algorithms and complexity theory in the computer science department. He also took a required writing course where he was the youngest student by at least a year, reading literature and philosophy and learning to articulate arguments about things that couldn't be reduced to equations. The academic work was challenging in a way that Marcus found thrilling. Finally, he was surrounded by people who could push him, professors who knew vastly more than he did, problems that didn't yield easily to his intuition. He spent long hours in the library, in study rooms, in his dorm room, working through problem sets and reading dense academic papers. He loved every minute of it. But the social side of college was harder for Marcus to navigate. Most of the undergraduates in his dorm were 18 or 19, close to his age but worlds apart in terms of life experience. They were interested in parties, dating, exploring their newfound freedom away from their parents. Marcus, who had been so focused on intellectual development, felt socially younger than his peers. He had never been drunk, never been to a party, never had a serious relationship. He tagged along to some freshman events in those first weeks, trying to be social, but he often felt out of place. He found his people, eventually, among the mathematics graduate students. Even though he was technically an undergraduate, he was taking their classes, doing research at their level, so they accepted him into their community. There was a group of them that would meet most afternoons in the graduate student lounge, drinking bad coffee and discussing mathematics, arguing about the most elegant proofs of various theorems, collaborating on research problems. Marcus became a regular at these gatherings, and for the first time since leaving his weekend program back in San Francisco, he felt like he belonged somewhere. One of the graduate students he became close with was a woman named Sarah Goldstein. Marcus did a double take when he first met her at MIT, realizing she was the same Sarah he had been in a group with during his first day in the gifted program back when he was 10. She remembered him too, and they laughed about how they had both ended up here, following their mathematical interests to one of the top programs in the world. Sarah was 4 years older than Marcus, working on her Ph.D. in number theory. She took him under her wing somewhat, helping him navigate the graduate program, introducing him to other students and faculty, giving him advice about research and academics and life. Through Sarah, Marcus met her advisor, Professor Catherine Morrison, who would become Marcus's Ph.D. advisor as well. Professor Morrison was one of the leading number theorists in the world, known for her elegant proofs and her ability to see deep connections between different areas of mathematics. She was also known for being demanding, pushing her students hard, expecting excellence. When Sarah introduced Marcus to her and explained his background, Professor Morrison was skeptical. She had seen young prodigies before, and many of them burned out or failed to transition from being exceptional young students to being productive research mathematicians. But she agreed to meet with Marcus, and she gave him a problem to work on as a test. The problem was in analytic number theory, involving the distribution of prime numbers, and it was notoriously difficult. Professor Morrison didn't expect Marcus to solve it. She wanted to see how he approached it, how he thought through a hard problem, whether he would give up or persist. Marcus worked on the problem for 3 weeks, filling notebook after notebook with attempted approaches. He met with Professor Morrison weekly to discuss his progress, and she began to see that Marcus had something special, not just technical skill, but mathematical intuition, the ability to smell where the solution might be hiding even before he could prove it. Marcus didn't solve the problem completely, but he made significant progress, developing a new approach that Professor Morrison thought was promising. She agreed to take him on as a Ph.D. student, even though he was still technically an undergraduate. Over the next year, as Marcus completed his remaining undergraduate requirements, he also began working on his doctoral research under Professor Morrison's supervision. This period, from ages 17 to 20, was one of tremendous growth for Marcus. He was developing not just as a mathematician but as a person. He was learning to collaborate, to communicate his ideas, to handle the frustration of working on problems where progress was slow and uncertain. He was learning the difference between being a talented student who could solve known problems and being a researcher who had to create new mathematics out of uncertainty and conjecture. He was also, finally, developing romantic relationships. During his sophomore year at MIT, when he was 18, Marcus started dating a woman named Chen Wei, another mathematics student, though her last name was a coincidence not a relation. Chen Wei was brilliant and driven, from mainland China, completing her master's degree in applied mathematics. She was 2 years older than Marcus, and she found his combination of intellectual intensity and social awkwardness endearing. They connected over their shared language Mandarin, which Marcus spoke at home with his parents, and their shared passion for mathematics. The relationship was Marcus's first serious romance, and it was both wonderful and terrifying. He had no template for how to be a boyfriend, how to balance his research work with spending time with another person, how to handle the vulnerability of caring deeply for someone. Chen Wei was patient with him, finding his earnestness sweet even when he was clueless about romantic gestures or social expectations. They would spend long evenings together, sometimes working on problems set side by side, sometimes talking about their families and dreams and fears. But the relationship also showed Marcus something about himself that he found troubling, his tendency to become completely absorbed in his work to the exclusion of everything else. When he was deep into a research problem, days could go by where he barely thought about Chen Wei, where he would cancel plans because he was on the verge of a breakthrough and couldn't pull himself away from his work. Chen Wei understood to a point she was driven and ambitious herself, but she also needed more emotional presence than Marcus was consistently able to provide. They dated for about 8 months before Chen Wei sat Marcus down and told him that the relationship wasn't working for her. She cared about him, she said, but she felt like she was always secondary to his research, like he was never fully present with her even when they were together. Marcus knew she was right, and part of him was relieved, if he was honest with himself. The relationship had required an emotional energy that he found draining, even though he cared about Chen Wei. After they broke up, he threw himself even more deeply into his research, perhaps as a way of avoiding the feelings of rejection and loneliness that the breakup brought up. Marcus was 19 when he made his first major breakthrough in his doctoral research. He had been working for over a year on a problem in analytic number theory related to the distribution of prime numbers in certain sequences. The problem had been open for decades, with some of the best mathematical minds attempting it without success. Professor Morrison had given it to Marcus not because she expected him to solve it, but because working on it would develop his skills and intuition even if he only made partial progress. But Marcus approached the problem from an unexpected angle, combining techniques from analytic number theory with ideas from harmonic analysis and some recent developments in ergodic theory. It was an unusual combination, and most mathematicians wouldn't have thought to put these pieces together. But Marcus had always been able to see connections across different domains, and his mind naturally sought out these kinds of unexpected links. The breakthrough came during finals week, ironically, when Marcus should have been focused on studying for his exams. He was sitting in the library at 2 in the morning, supposedly reviewing for a physics exam, but his mind kept drifting back to the number theory problem. He was doodling in the margins of his notebook, playing with some equations, when suddenly he saw it. A way to use a theorem from harmonic analysis to bridge a gap in the proof that had seemed insurmountable. His heart started racing. He abandoned the physics textbook entirely and spent the next 6 hours working through the implications of this insight. By 8 in the morning, when other students were just arriving at the library for morning study sessions, Marcus had outlined a complete proof. He was exhausted, running on no sleep and too much coffee, but he was also more excited than he had been in months. He went directly to Professor Morrison's office, arriving there before she did, and waited outside her door like an eager puppy. When she arrived at 9 o'clock and saw him sitting there with wild hair and bloodshot eyes, holding a notebook covered in frantic mathematical scrawling, she knew immediately that something significant had happened. They spent the next 3 hours in her office going through Marcus's proof step by step. Professor Morrison was rigorous, checking every claim, every logical inference, looking for gaps or errors. But the proof held. Marcus had actually done it. He had solved a problem that had stumped mathematicians for decades. Professor Morrison looked at Marcus with something like awe in her eyes and said, "You realize what this means, don't you? This is a major result. This will make your career." Over the next months, Marcus wrote up his result formally, with Professor Morrison's guidance. The paper was dense and technical, running to nearly 50 pages of careful mathematical argument. They submitted it to the Annals of Mathematics, one of the most prestigious journals in the field. The peer review process took almost a year, during which time Marcus defended his dissertation and officially completed his Ph.D. requirements. At age 20, Marcus Chen became Dr. Marcus Chen, one of the youngest people to ever earn a Ph.D. in mathematics from MIT. The paper was accepted and published shortly after his 20th birthday. The result sent ripples through the mathematical community. Here was a barely 20-year-old who had solved a long-standing open problem in number theory. Invitations started pouring in for Marcus to give talks at conferences, to visit other universities, to apply for prestigious postdoctoral positions. Suddenly Marcus wasn't just a promising young mathematician, he was a rising star in the field. Princeton offered him a postdoctoral fellowship, one of the most competitive and prestigious positions in mathematics. The Institute for Advanced Study, where Einstein had once worked, invited him to spend time as a visiting researcher. Stanford tried to lure him back to California with the promise of a faculty position, which would be extremely unusual for someone who had just completed their Ph.D. Marcus felt overwhelmed by all the attention and opportunities. He sought advice from Professor Morrison, who told him to take the Princeton Fellowship, to give himself a few more years to develop as a researcher before taking on the responsibilities of a faculty position. So Marcus moved to Princeton at age 20, entering yet another new phase of his life. The postdoctoral fellowship came with almost no teaching responsibilities, which meant Marcus could dedicate himself almost entirely to research. He had an office in Fine Hall, the mathematics building, surrounded by some of the greatest mathematical minds in the world. Nobel laureates and Fields medalists walked the same hallways he did. The level of discourse, the depth of mathematical conversation, was unlike anything Marcus had experienced before. He thrived in this environment. During his first year at Princeton, he published 3 more papers, each making significant contributions to various areas of number theory and analysis. His reputation continued to grow. By age 21, Marcus was invited to give a plenary lecture at the International Congress of Mathematicians, an honor typically reserved for much more senior researchers. He stood on stage in front of thousands of mathematicians from around the world and presented his work, feeling both terrified and exhilarated by the experience. But something was changing in Marcus during this period. The single-minded focus that had driven him throughout his childhood and adolescence was beginning to feel like a prison. He was achieving everything he had worked toward, earning recognition and respect in his field, but he was also lonely and emotionally disconnected. He had acquaintances and colleagues but few real friends. He hadn't been in a relationship since Chen Wei. His life revolved entirely around mathematics, and while he loved the work, he was starting to realize that human beings need more than intellectual fulfillment to be truly happy. He called his parents more regularly during this time, feeling homesick in a way he hadn't since first leaving for MIT. His mother would tell him about the restaurant, about the neighborhood gossip, about Lily's latest achievements in school. His father, never comfortable with phone conversations, would usually just say a few words before passing the phone back to his mother. But Marcus could hear the pride in his father's voice, even in those brief exchanges. Lily was in high school now, a confident teenager who seemed to have navigated adolescence much more smoothly than Marcus had. She was applying to colleges, interested in studying journalism and political science. Marcus realized with some surprise that his sister had become her own person with her own dreams, and he regretted that he had been so absent during her teenage years, so consumed by his own pursuits. When Marcus was 22, he experienced his first major professional setback. He had been working on what he thought would be his most significant result yet, a proof of a major conjecture in algebraic number theory. He had been working on it for months, and he believed he had found a complete proof. He wrote up the result and submitted it to a top journal, confident that this would cement his status as one of the leading mathematicians of his generation. But during the peer review process, one of the reviewers found a subtle error in Marcus's proof, a gap in the logic that Marcus had missed. The error wasn't fixable with minor corrections, it invalidated the entire approach Marcus had been taking. The paper was rejected. Marcus was devastated. He had been so certain, had invested so much time and energy, and it had all been for nothing. For the first time in his professional life, Marcus experienced real failure. He spiraled into a depression that lasted for several months. He couldn't focus on work, couldn't summon the motivation to start new projects. He felt like a fraud, like his earlier successes had been luck rather than genuine ability. He stopped going to seminars, stopped responding to emails from colleagues, spent his days alone in his apartment staring at the walls. His friends and colleagues noticed the change but didn't know how to help. Marcus had always seemed so self-sufficient, so driven, that no one realized how much his identity was wrapped up in his intellectual achievements and how vulnerable he was to failure. It was Sarah Goldstein who finally broke through to him. She had finished her Ph.D. at MIT and was now a faculty member at Columbia. When she heard through the mathematical grapevine that Marcus was struggling, she took the train down to Princeton and showed up at his apartment unannounced. She found Marcus unshaven, his apartment a mess, clearly not taking care of himself. She didn't offer platitudes or try to minimize what had happened. Instead, she told him about her own failures, the papers that had been rejected, the research directions that had led nowhere, the moments when she had questioned whether she was cut out for mathematics. "Marcus," she said, sitting on his couch amid piles of unread mail and unwashed dishes, "you're one of the most talented mathematicians I've ever met. But talent isn't enough. Everyone fails. Everyone makes mistakes. The question isn't whether you'll have setbacks, it's whether you'll let them destroy you or whether you'll learn from them and keep going. Right now, you're letting one failed paper define you. But you're so much more than one result, successful or not." Sarah stayed for the weekend, helping Marcus clean his apartment, making him go outside and walk around campus, forcing him to eat proper meals. By the time she left, something had shifted in Marcus. He still felt the sting of failure, but he no longer felt paralyzed by it. He went back to his office, started reading papers again, began thinking about new problems. He realized that the failed proof, while disappointing, had taught him something important about the problem structure. He started working on a modified approach, more careful this time, checking his work more rigorously. This period of depression and recovery, while painful, was important for Marcus's development as a person. He learned that his worth wasn't entirely tied to his intellectual achievements, that he could fail and survive, that vulnerability wasn't weakness. He also realized how much he needed other people, how isolated he had allowed himself to become. He made an effort to be more social, to attend departmental events, to have actual conversations with colleagues instead of just talking about mathematics. It was during this more social period that Marcus met Alex Rodriguez. Alex was a postdoc in theoretical physics at Princeton, studying quantum information theory. They met at an interdisciplinary seminar on cryptography, where both mathematics and physics perspectives were relevant. Marcus gave a short presentation on number-theoretic approaches to cryptographic problems, and Alex asked an insightful question during the Q&A that showed he understood the mathematical subtleties involved. After the seminar, they started talking and ended up going to dinner together. The conversation flowed easily, ranging from their research to their backgrounds to their thoughts on science and life. Alex was openly gay, which he mentioned casually during dinner when talking about his ex-boyfriend. Marcus, who had never really examined his own sexuality deeply, found himself attracted to Alex in a way that confused and intrigued him. He had dated women, but those relationships had always felt somewhat forced, like he was going through the motions of what he thought he should do rather than following genuine desire. Over the next weeks, Marcus and Alex spent more time together. They would meet for lunch, go to seminars together, take walks around Princeton's beautiful campus. Marcus found himself thinking about Alex constantly, looking forward to their conversations, feeling a nervous excitement when they were together that he had never quite felt in his relationships with women. He was 22 years old and beginning to realize that he might be bisexual, maybe even primarily attracted to men, which was both liberating and frightening. It was Alex who made the first move. They were in Marcus's office late one evening, working on a problem at the intersection of their fields, and Alex leaned over and kissed Marcus. For a moment, Marcus froze, his mind racing through implications and fears and uncertainties. But then he kissed Alex back, and it felt right in a way that surprised him with its intensity. They started dating, though they kept the relationship quiet at first. Marcus was still figuring out his sexuality, still uncertain about being open about dating a man in the relatively conservative world of academic mathematics. Alex was patient with Marcus's hesitation, understanding that coming out is a process that everyone navigates differently. But he also gently pushed Marcus to be more honest with himself and others about who he was. The relationship with Alex was transformative for Marcus. For the first time, he was with someone who understood the demands of academic research, who could relate to the obsessive focus that research requires, but who also helped Marcus maintain balance in his life. Alex introduced Marcus to his circle of friends, a diverse group of artists, scientists, and activists in the Princeton and New York area. Through Alex, Marcus experienced parts of life he had largely ignored during his single-minded pursuit of mathematical achievement: art museums, concerts, political activism, the simple pleasure of dinner parties with interesting people talking about ideas outside his narrow field. When Marcus was 23, he came out to his family. He flew home to San Francisco for Christmas break and sat down with his parents in their apartment above the noodle shop. He told them he was dating someone, and that someone was a man named Alex. His mother's first reaction was silence, processing this information that challenged her expectations for her son. His father looked uncomfortable, his traditional Chinese values making this difficult to accept immediately. But then his mother asked, "Are you happy?" And Marcus realized that yes, he was. Happier than he had been in years. His mother said, "Then we will accept this. It may take time for us to understand, but you are our son, and we love you." His father nodded, not quite able to put his acceptance into words but clearly trying. Lily, who had been listening from the other room, came in and hugged Marcus and said, "I already knew. Your Facebook settings aren't as private as you think. I'm happy for you." Coming out was a weight lifted from Marcus's shoulders. He stopped hiding his relationship with Alex, introduced him to colleagues, brought him to departmental events. Most people in the Princeton mathematics community were supportive or indifferent in a good way, treating it as unremarkable. There were a few older faculty members who seemed uncomfortable, who stopped inviting Marcus to certain social events, but Marcus found he didn't care as much as he thought he would. He was learning to value his authentic self over universal approval. Professionally, Marcus continued to thrive. By age 24, he had published over a dozen significant papers. He was offered faculty positions at multiple top universities. After careful consideration and discussions with Alex and his mentors, Marcus accepted a position as assistant professor at Stanford, bringing his career full circle back to the Bay Area where he had grown up. Stanford offered him an incredibly generous startup package, including funding for graduate students, reduced teaching load for his first years to focus on research, and the resources to build his own research group. Moving back to California at 24 felt surreal for Marcus. He was returning as a professor at one of the world's great universities, teaching at an institution that had courted him when he was still a teenager. Alex, willing to make the move, found a research position at the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory at Stanford, so they relocated together, renting a small house in Palo Alto. Marcus's parents were thrilled to have him back in California, even if Palo Alto was an hour's drive from San Francisco. His father, now in his 60s, had finally acknowledged that Marcus's path was not going to involve the noodle shop, and he seemed proud that his son was a professor at Stanford. His mother would drive down to visit, bringing homemade dumplings and fussing over Marcus and Alex, treating Alex with kindness even though Marcus knew she was still adjusting to having a son with a male partner. As a young faculty member, Marcus worked to find his identity as a mentor and teacher, not just a researcher. He took on his first graduate students, bright young mathematicians who wanted to work with him because of his reputation and results. Teaching them, guiding their research, Marcus discovered a new dimension to his mathematical life. It wasn't just about his own achievements anymore, it was about helping the next generation develop their abilities, about passing on what he had learned. One of his first students was a young woman named Priya Mehta, who had a background similar to Marcus's in many ways, a prodigy from a working-class immigrant family, someone who had always been the smartest person in the room and was still learning to navigate the social and emotional aspects of that reality. Marcus saw himself in Priya and made a conscious effort to be the kind of mentor he wished he had had more consistently, someone who cared not just about her research productivity but about her well-being as a whole person. He advised Priya to maintain friendships outside mathematics, to develop hobbies and interests beyond her research, to not make the mistakes he had made of letting work consume everything. He was honest with her about his own struggles with depression after the failed proof at Princeton, about the loneliness he had felt during his 20s, about the importance of building a life outside of academic achievement. Priya appreciated this honesty, and Marcus found that being a mentor forced him to articulate lessons he had learned through difficult experience. When Marcus was 25, his father had a heart attack. It happened at the restaurant, during the dinner rush, and David Chen collapsed in the kitchen. He survived, but the heart attack was serious, requiring bypass surgery and a long recovery. Marcus drove up to San Francisco as soon as he got the call, sitting in the hospital waiting room with his mother and sister while his father was in surgery. It was one of the most frightening experiences of Marcus's life, forcing him to confront his father's mortality and his own complicated feelings about their relationship. His father survived the surgery and was told he needed to make major lifestyle changes, less stress, better diet, more exercise, possibly retirement. The noodle shop, which had been the center of his father's life for 30 years, was too much stress for a man recovering from a heart attack. Marcus had a serious conversation with his parents about finances, about retirement, about what came next. He offered to help them financially, and after some resistance, his father's pride making it hard to accept money from his son, they agreed to sell the restaurant and retire. The sale of the noodle shop was emotional for the whole family. It had been more than a business, it had been their livelihood, their connection to the community, a symbol of what his parents had built in America after immigrating from Taiwan. Marcus helped his parents sort through decades of accumulated items from the restaurant, finding old photos, menu prototypes from when they first opened, newspaper clippings about the business. He realized how much sacrifice had gone into giving him the opportunities he had had, how his parents had worked those 18-hour days year after year to provide stability for their children. After the restaurant sold, Marcus's parents moved to a small condo in Daly City, closer to the ocean, designed for retirement living. His father struggled with retirement at first, restless without the structure and purpose the restaurant had provided. But gradually he adjusted, taking up activities he had never had time for before, joining a Tai Chi group, volunteering at the local Chinese community center, spending time with old friends. His mother seemed to blossom in retirement, taking classes in watercolor painting, traveling to visit relatives in Taiwan for the first time in decades. Marcus was 26 when he and Alex decided to get married. Same-sex marriage had been legal in California for several years by then, but it still felt momentous, a public declaration of their commitment to each other. They had a small ceremony at the Stanford Memorial Church, with close friends and family in attendance. Marcus's parents were there, his mother crying happy tears, his father stoic but present. Lily was maid of honor, giving a speech that made everyone laugh and cry. Sarah Goldstein flew out from New York. Some of Marcus's colleagues and students attended. It was a perfect day, and Marcus felt surrounded by love in a way that would have seemed impossible to his younger self, who had been so isolated and focused solely on intellectual achievement. Marriage changed something for Marcus, made him feel more settled, more adult in ways that all his professional achievements hadn't. He and Alex bought a house together in Menlo Park, a small craftsman home with a garden that Alex enjoyed tending. They settled into domestic life, the rhythms of two academics building a life together, morning coffee before heading to their respective campuses, evenings cooking dinner and talking about their work, weekends hiking in the hills or driving up the coast. Professionally, Marcus continued to produce significant results. By 27, he was widely regarded as one of the leading mathematicians of his generation. He was promoted to associate professor with tenure, an unusually early tenure given his age, but his publication record and impact on the field made it an easy decision for Stanford. He won several prestigious prizes in mathematics, including the Salem Prize and the Sloan Fellowship. His name was starting to be mentioned in conversations about who might eventually win the Fields Medal, the highest honor in mathematics, which is only awarded to mathematicians under 40. But Marcus was also becoming increasingly interested in applications of his pure mathematical research. Through conversations with Alex and others at Stanford, he began to see how number theory and the kind of abstract mathematics he loved could have practical implications for cryptography, computer science, and even quantum computing. He started collaborating with computer scientists and engineers, translating theoretical results into practical algorithms. This applied work led Marcus to found a startup when he was 28. Along with two computer science professors and one of his former Ph.D. students, Marcus started a company focused on post-quantum cryptography, developing encryption methods that would be secure even against quantum computers, which threatened to break most current cryptographic systems. Marcus maintained his faculty position at Stanford, taking a leave of absence to focus on getting the company off the ground. The startup world was completely different from academic mathematics, and Marcus had to learn a new set of skills: fundraising, hiring, management, dealing with venture capitalists and business development. He was out of his comfort zone in many ways, but his analytical mind and problem-solving abilities served him well. The company, which they named Cipher Theory, raised several $1 million in seed funding and began developing its first products. Running a startup while maintaining his academic career was exhausting. Marcus was working 80-hour weeks, traveling constantly for meetings with investors and potential customers, managing a growing team of engineers and researchers. Alex worried about him, seeing Marcus slip back into some of the unhealthy patterns of overwork that had characterized his early 20s. They had several difficult conversations about balance, about priorities, about what Marcus really wanted from his life. The truth was that Marcus himself wasn't entirely sure. He loved the intellectual challenge of the startup, the feeling of building something concrete that could have real-world impact. But he also missed the purity of academic research, the deep focus on mathematical problems without concerns about market viability or business metrics. He felt pulled in multiple directions, trying to be a good professor, a successful entrepreneur, a supportive spouse, a dutiful son, and he wasn't sure he was succeeding at any of these roles. When Marcus was 29, Cipher Theory was acquired by a major tech company for a substantial sum. The acquisition meant Marcus had significant financial security for the first time in his life. He was suddenly wealthy, not billionaire wealthy but comfortable enough that he would never have to worry about money again. He made sure his parents were taken care of, setting up trusts to ensure their retirement was secure. He established a scholarship fund at his old high school for gifted students from low-income families. He donated to the university gifted program that had been so important to his development. The acquisition also freed Marcus from the day-to-day demands of running a startup. He returned to Stanford full-time, to teaching and research, though he remained a technical advisor to the team at the acquiring company. At 30, Marcus took stock of his life. He had achieved extraordinary success in his field, had contributed significant results to mathematics, had even built a successful company. He was happily married, financially secure, respected by his peers. By any external measure, his life was a remarkable success. But internally, Marcus was grappling with questions of meaning and purpose. He had spent his entire life being exceptional, meeting and exceeding expectations, achieving goals. But what was it all for? What did he want his legacy to be? These were questions that mathematics couldn't answer, that his intellect alone couldn't solve. He started seeing a therapist, something he probably should have done years earlier, working through issues of identity, self-worth, the pressure he had always felt to perform and achieve. Therapy helped Marcus understand patterns in his life, the way he had used achievement to win love and approval, the way he had neglected his emotional development in favor of intellectual development, the lingering sense that he was never quite good enough despite all his accomplishments. He began to develop a more compassionate relationship with himself, to see his younger self with kindness rather than judgment. Marcus also became more intentional about giving back to the mathematical community and to the broader community of gifted young people. He took on more mentorship responsibilities, not just with his Ph.D. students but with undergraduate students and even high school students who showed exceptional mathematical talent. He remembered what it had felt like to be a gifted kid without resources, and he wanted to create pathways for others like him. He started a summer program at Stanford for talented high school students from underserved communities, bringing them to campus for 6 weeks to work on advanced mathematics and get a taste of research. He personally raised funds for the program and recruited other faculty to teach. The program became one of his proudest achievements, seeing students light up with excitement about mathematics the way he once had, knowing he was giving them opportunities that could change their lives. When Marcus turned 31, he and Alex started discussing whether they wanted children. It was a complicated question. Both of them had demanding careers. Marcus worried about whether he would be a good father, whether he would repeat some of his own father's mistakes, being physically present but emotionally distant. But he also felt a pull toward parenthood, a desire to nurture and guide a child, to share the wonder of learning and discovery with a new generation. They decided to pursue adoption, starting the long process of home studies and applications. During this time, Marcus found himself thinking more about his own childhood, about what had shaped him, about what kind of parent he wanted to be. He had long conversations with his own father, who was now in his 70s, asking him about his experiences as a parent, what his hopes and fears had been. His father opened up in ways he never had when Marcus was younger, talking about the pressure he had felt to provide for his family in a new country, his regrets about not being more emotionally available, his pride in what both his children had accomplished. These conversations deepened Marcus's relationship with his father, creating a closeness they had never quite achieved during Marcus's childhood and adolescence. Marcus realized that his father had done the best he could with the emotional tools he had, shaped by his own upbringing and the demands of immigrant life. He forgave his father for the times he had seemed disappointed or distant, understanding now that these reactions came from love and high expectations, however imperfectly expressed. At 32, Marcus was named a full professor at Stanford, the youngest in the mathematics department's history. The same year, he received the news that he had been awarded the Cole Prize in Number Theory, one of the most prestigious honors in his field. The award came with an invitation to give a lecture series at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, bringing his career full circle back to where he had done his postdoctoral work. But the professional achievement that meant the most to Marcus that year was seeing Priya Mehta, his first Ph.D. student, successfully defend her dissertation. Marcus had worked with Priya for 5 years, guiding her through the challenges of doctoral research, supporting her through moments of doubt and struggle, celebrating her breakthroughs and insights. Watching her present her work to the faculty committee, answering questions with confidence and clarity, Marcus felt a pride that was different from the pride of his own achievements. This was the pride of having helped someone else develop their potential, of having passed on something valuable. At 33, Marcus and Alex received a call from the adoption agency. There was a 3-year-old boy named Daniel who needed a home. His birth mother, a teenager who had struggled with addiction, had had her parental rights terminated, and Daniel had been in foster care for the past year. Would Marcus and Alex be interested in meeting him? They said yes immediately, and 2 weeks later, they met Daniel for the first time at the foster home where he was staying. Daniel was small for his age, quiet and watchful in a way that reminded Marcus of himself as a child. The foster parents explained that Daniel had experienced trauma and neglect in his early years, that he would need patience and lots of love and probably therapy. Marcus and Alex didn't hesitate. They began the process of bringing Daniel into their home, first as foster parents and eventually, 6 months later, finalizing the adoption. Parenthood was harder than Marcus had imagined and more rewarding than he had dreamed possible. Daniel was a challenging child, understandably so given his early experiences. He had tantrums, struggled with attachment, needed constant reassurance and structure. Marcus found himself drawing on reserves of patience he didn't know he had. He reduced his work hours, turned down some speaking invitations and collaborations, made space in his life for the demands of parenting. Watching Daniel slowly open up, learning to trust them, beginning to smile and laugh and show affection, was one of the most powerful experiences of Marcus's life. It put his mathematical achievements in perspective. This helping a traumatized child heal and grow felt more important than any theorem he had ever proved. It required different skills than mathematics, empathy, patience, consistency, unconditional love. Marcus discovered he had these capacities, even if they didn't come as naturally to him as mathematical reasoning. Marcus was 34 when Daniel started kindergarten at the local elementary school. The teacher called Marcus and Alex in for a meeting a few weeks into the school year. They walked into the classroom feeling anxious, worried that Daniel was having behavioral problems, that his early trauma was manifesting in ways the school couldn't handle. But the teacher had called them in for a different reason. She had noticed that Daniel, despite his young age and his difficult start in life, seemed to have unusual intellectual abilities. He was reading already, doing arithmetic, asking questions that showed sophisticated reasoning for a 5-year-old. Marcus felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing this. Part of him was proud, recognizing something of himself in his adopted son. But part of him worried. He knew better than anyone the challenges of being a gifted child, the social difficulties, the pressure, the isolation. He didn't want Daniel to go through what he had gone through. He and Alex decided to have Daniel tested by an educational psychologist, just to understand what they were dealing with. The results showed that Daniel was indeed gifted, though not at the extreme level Marcus had been. His IQ was around 135, in the 99th percentile but not the 99.99th. The psychologist recommended some educational accommodations but cautioned against pushing Daniel too hard, emphasizing that his emotional development and healing from early trauma should be the priority. Marcus took this advice to heart. He was determined that Daniel would have a more balanced childhood than he had had, that academic achievement would not come at the cost of emotional health and social development. Over the next years, Marcus and Alex focused on giving Daniel a stable, loving home. They got him therapy to process his early trauma. They enrolled him in activities he enjoyed, like soccer and art classes, not pushing him toward any particular achievement. Marcus helped Daniel with homework when asked but was careful not to turn every interaction into a teaching moment. He wanted Daniel to know he was loved for who he was, not for what he could accomplish. Marcus's perspective on his own giftedness evolved during these years of parenting. He had spent so much of his life defining himself by his intellectual abilities, measuring his worth by his achievements. But watching Daniel, loving this child unconditionally regardless of his abilities or accomplishments, helped Marcus extend some of that same unconditional acceptance to himself. He began to see his own intelligence not as something that defined his worth but simply as one characteristic among many, a tool he could use but not the essence of who he was. At 36, Marcus was asked to give a keynote address at an international conference on mathematical education for gifted children. He accepted the invitation, seeing it as an opportunity to share what he had learned about giftedness through his own experience and through parenting Daniel. In his speech, he talked about the importance of developing the whole child, not just their intellectual abilities. He spoke about the loneliness of being different, the pressure to perform, the need for emotional support and social connection alongside academic challenge. We celebrate achievement, Marcus said to the audience of educators and parents, and achievement is important. But we need to also teach our gifted children how to fail, how to struggle, how to ask for help. We need to value their emotional intelligence as much as their IQ. We need to help them develop identities that aren't solely based on being the smartest person in the room. The speech was well received, and Marcus received emails for months afterward from parents and teachers thanking him for his perspective. Marcus's own research continued during these years, though at a different pace than during his 20s. He was still producing important results, still making contributions to his field, but he wasn't working 80-hour weeks anymore. He had learned to say no, to protect time for his family, to maintain boundaries between work and life. His productivity in terms of papers published per year decreased, but the quality and depth of his work arguably improved. He was thinking about bigger problems, taking his time to fully explore ideas rather than rushing to publish. When Marcus was 38, he received an email that made his heart stop. It was from the secretary of the International Mathematical Union, informing him that he had been awarded the Fields Medal, the highest honor in mathematics. The Fields Medal is only awarded every 4 years to mathematicians under the age of 40, and it is considered the equivalent of a Nobel Prize for mathematics. Marcus had been on short lists and in rumors for several years, but he had tried not to think about it too much, knowing that hoping for it would only lead to disappointment if it didn't happen. But it had happened. He was going to receive the Fields Medal at the International Congress of Mathematicians in St. Petersburg later that year. Marcus read the email 3 times to make sure he was understanding it correctly, then called Alex at work, his hands shaking as he dialed. Alex started crying when Marcus told him the news, and they both laughed at themselves for being so emotional about it. That evening, they told Daniel, who was 8 years old now. Daniel didn't fully understand what a Fields Medal was, but he understood that it was important and that his dad had done something special, and he gave Marcus a big hug and said he was proud of him. Marcus called his parents to tell them the news. His mother screamed with joy so loudly that neighbors came over to see if everything was okay. His father, true to form, said simply, "Good. You worked hard." But Marcus could hear the emotion in his father's voice, the pride that his immigrant father felt in his son's extraordinary achievement. Lily, now working as a journalist in Washington, D.C., wrote a profile of Marcus for her publication, telling the story of their Chinatown childhood and their parents' noodle shop and the path that had led her brother to becoming one of the world's top mathematicians. The Fields Medal ceremony in St. Petersburg was a surreal experience for Marcus. He walked onto the stage in front of thousands of mathematicians from around the world, receiving the medal from the president of the International Mathematical Union. He gave a lecture about his work, explaining the results that had contributed to the award. His family was there in the audience, Alex and Daniel, his parents who had made the long trip from California, Lily who had taken time off work to attend. Sarah Goldstein was there, and Dr. Vasquez, his first mentor from the gifted program, now retired but still following Marcus's career with pride. Even Bernard, the old chess player from Golden Gate Park, had somehow learned about the ceremony and sent Marcus a congratulatory message. After the ceremony, Marcus did countless interviews with journalists, mathematicians asking about his future research directions, young students wanting advice. Through it all, he tried to stay grounded, to remember that this was an honor for work he had done, not a definition of his worth as a person. The night after the ceremony, alone in his hotel room while Alex and Daniel slept, Marcus looked at the Fields Medal in his hands. It was beautiful, with its profile of Archimedes and its Latin inscription. But more than the medal itself, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here, the little boy in Chinatown watching his mother's feet, the teenager struggling to fit in, the young adult grappling with identity and purpose, the man he had become through all of it. Returning to Stanford after the medal, Marcus found that his life changed in some ways but remained the same in others. He was more famous in the mathematics world, received more invitations to speak and collaborate, had more opportunities than he could possibly accept. But day to day, he was still a professor teaching classes, advising students, doing research. He was still a parent helping with homework and packing school lunches, a husband sharing household responsibilities and planning weekend activities, a son calling his aging parents regularly to check in. Marcus was 40 when he began to think seriously about what the next phase of his life should look like. He had achieved the highest honors in his field, had financial security, had a loving family. The question that had haunted him throughout his 30s, what was it all for, had evolved into a new question: what do I want to contribute with the time and opportunities I have left? He started looking beyond pure mathematics toward problems with broader social impact. Climate change, artificial intelligence, safety, educational equity, these were challenges that mathematical thinking could help address, but that required collaboration across disciplines and engagement with policy and society. Marcus began attending conferences outside mathematics, meeting scientists, engineers, policymakers, activists. He started to see how his particular combination of skills, deep analytical thinking, pattern recognition, ability to communicate complex ideas, could be applied to problems that affected millions of people. That same year, Daniel was struggling at school. Now 10 years old, he was intellectually ahead of his classmates but socially behind. The trauma of his early years still affected him in ways that emerged at unexpected moments, difficulty with emotional regulation, challenges forming close friendships, a fear of abandonment that made him clingy at home but defensive with peers. The school counselor recommended more intensive therapy, possibly a specialized program for children with complex needs. Marcus felt his heart break watching his son struggle. He saw echoes of his own childhood isolation but knew that Daniel's challenges were different from his own. Where Marcus had retreated into his mind, Daniel acted out. Where Marcus had hidden his feelings, Daniel's emotions overwhelmed him. Marcus had to learn new ways of being a father, ways that his own father had never modeled for him. He learned to sit with Daniel through meltdowns, to validate feelings without trying to logic them away, to provide the steady emotional presence that Daniel needed to feel safe. One night, after a particularly hard day where Daniel had gotten in trouble at school for hitting another student who had teased him, Marcus sat with his son at bedtime. Daniel was crying, saying he was bad, that nobody liked him, that he wished he was different. Marcus held his son and told him something he wished someone had told him when he was young: "You're not bad. You've been through hard things that weren't your fault, and sometimes those hard things make it difficult to handle your feelings. But you're learning. And no matter what happens, no matter how you struggle, Dad and Papa love you completely. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be the best at anything. You just have to keep trying, and we'll be here with you every step of the way." Marcus's relationship with his own parents deepened during these years. His father's health was declining. The heart attack had been the first of several cardiovascular events. His mother was showing early signs of dementia, forgetting small things at first, then larger things, becoming confused about dates and names. Marcus drove up to San Francisco more frequently, sometimes bringing Daniel, sometimes going alone. He helped his parents with medical appointments, with managing their finances, with decisions about their care. During one visit, when Marcus was 41, his father had what would turn out to be his final lucid conversation with Marcus. They were sitting in his parents' small living room, his mother napping in the bedroom, sunlight streaming through the window. His father, 78 now and looking every year of it, took Marcus's hand, an unusual gesture for a man who had never been physically affectionate, and said in Mandarin, "I need to tell you something before I forget to say it or before I can't say it anymore. I was too hard on you when you were young. I pushed you because I wanted you to have opportunities I never had, but I didn't always show you that I loved you just for being you, not for being exceptional. I'm sorry for that. And I'm proud of you, not because of your awards or your achievements, but because you're a good man, a kind man, a better father than I was. You did what I always hoped. You became better than me." Marcus wept openly, something he hadn't done in front of his father since he was a child. He told his father that he understood, that he didn't hold any resentment, that he was grateful for all the sacrifices his parents had made. They sat together in that sunlit room, two men from different generations and different worlds, connected by love that had always been present even when it was hard to express. David Chen died 6 months later, peacefully in his sleep. Marcus gave the eulogy at the funeral, speaking in both English and Mandarin about his father's journey from Taiwan to America, his decades of hard work at the restaurant, his devotion to family. Marcus talked about what he had learned from his father, the value of persistence, the importance of responsibility, the dignity of providing for those you love. The church in San Francisco's Chinatown was packed. Old customers from the restaurant, neighbors, friends, extended family. Marcus realized that his father had touched many more lives than he had known, that beyond being Marcus's father, David Chen had been a valued member of a community. His mother's dementia progressed more quickly after his father's death, as often happens when elderly spouses lose their partners. Within a year, she needed full-time care that Marcus and Lily arranged, moving her into an assisted living facility that specialized in memory care. Marcus visited as often as he could, sitting with his mother even when she no longer fully recognized him, holding her hand and telling her stories about his childhood, about the restaurant, about her grandchildren. Sometimes there would be moments of clarity when she would look at him and say his name, and those moments were precious beyond measure. At 42, Marcus made a significant career shift. He took a leave of absence from Stanford to work with a think tank in Washington, D.C. that focused on science policy. He had been invited to serve on a presidential advisory committee on artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, areas where his expertise in mathematics and cryptography was relevant. The work took him away from pure research, but it felt important in a different way. He was helping shape policy decisions that would affect national security and technological development, translating complex technical concepts into terms that policymakers could understand and act on. Alex and Daniel moved to D.C. with Marcus. Daniel, now 12, handled the transition better than they expected. The new school had a good program for gifted students with learning differences, and Daniel began to thrive in ways he hadn't before. He made friends with other kids who were both smart and struggling with their own challenges. He started to see his own experiences, the early trauma, the adoption, having two dads, being intellectually gifted but emotionally complex, not as deficits but as parts of his story that made him who he was. Marcus threw himself into the policy work with the same intensity he had once devoted to mathematics. He worked on developing frameworks for AI safety, testified before congressional committees about cybersecurity threats, helped draft legislation about data privacy and encryption. The work was frustrating at times. Policy moved slowly, political considerations often overrode technical ones, and the compromises necessary in government work were alien to someone used to the certainty of mathematical proof. But Marcus found it deeply satisfying to apply his analytical skills to real-world problems with immediate consequences. During this period, Marcus also became more politically engaged. He had always avoided politics, viewing it as messy and irrational compared to the clean logic of mathematics. But working in D.C., seeing firsthand how policy decisions were made, he realized that technical experts had a responsibility to engage with the political process, to ensure that decisions were informed by evidence and sound reasoning. He testified publicly, wrote op-eds for major newspapers, used his platform as a Fields Medalist to advocate for science funding, education reform, and evidence-based policy. Not everyone in the mathematics community appreciated this shift. Some colleagues felt Marcus was abandoning pure research, wasting his talents on applied work and policy advocacy. A few suggested, sometimes to his face, that he had peaked as a mathematician and was moving into policy because he couldn't compete at the highest research levels anymore. These criticisms stung, touching on Marcus's lingering insecurities about his worth and purpose. But he had learned enough about himself through therapy and through life experience to not let these voices derail him. He knew what felt meaningful to him, and he was following that sense of meaning rather than external expectations. When Marcus was 43, he received news that his mother had passed away. The dementia had progressed to the point where she no longer ate, and she died peacefully with Marcus and Lily by her side. Her death was less shocking than his father's. They had been losing her gradually for years, but it still left Marcus feeling untethered. Both his parents were gone now. He was no longer anyone's child, he was just the older generation himself, responsible for passing on what had been given to him. After his mother's funeral, Marcus and Lily spent an afternoon going through their parents' belongings in the assisted living facility. They found photo albums documenting their childhood, report cards, and school art projects their mother had saved, letters from relatives in Taiwan. Marcus found a notebook that his mother had kept during his childhood, written in Chinese, that he had never known about. Lily helped him translate it. It was a journal of sorts, where his mother had recorded her thoughts and feelings about raising Marcus. Reading his mother's words from decades ago, Marcus saw his childhood through her eyes. Her worry when he was so different from other children, her pride in his achievements mixed with concern that he was too isolated, her guilt that they couldn't afford better opportunities for him, her hope that his gifts would lead to a good life. She had written, when Marcus was about 8, "My son sees the world differently than others. Sometimes I worry this makes him lonely. But I also think maybe he will do something important someday, something that helps people. I pray he will be happy, that his gifts will be a blessing not a burden. Marcus wept reading these words, understanding fully for the first time the love and anxiety his mother had carried for him, the complexity of her experience as a parent to a highly gifted child. He wished he could tell her that yes, he was happy, that his gifts had been both blessing and burden but mostly blessing, that she and his father had given him everything he needed even if it hadn't always felt like enough in the moment. At 44, Marcus returned to Stanford, his policy fellowship complete. He came back with a renewed sense of purpose in his academic work. He established a new research center at Stanford focused on the intersection of mathematics, computer science, and social good. The center brought together researchers from multiple disciplines to work on problems like algorithmic fairness, privacy-preserving machine learning, and mathematical modeling of social systems. Marcus secured funding from tech companies and foundations, using his reputation and connections to build something larger than himself. He also radically changed his approach to teaching. He developed a new course called Mathematics for Humanity that was open to non-majors, designed to show students how mathematical thinking could help them understand and address social problems. The course was wildly popular, attracting hundreds of students from across the university. Marcus taught them about gerrymandering and voting theory, about infectious disease modeling and public health, about algorithmic bias and criminal justice, about climate models and environmental policy. He showed them that mathematics wasn't just abstract symbols on a blackboard but a powerful tool for understanding and changing the world. Daniel was in high school now, a thoughtful and creative teenager who had inherited both his father's intelligence and something uniquely his own, remarkable emotional insight and artistic talent. He was interested in filmmaking and storytelling, in understanding human psychology and emotion. He had worked through much of his early trauma, though it still influenced him in subtle ways. He was close with Marcus and Alex, comfortable talking to them about his feelings, his struggles, his hopes. Marcus marveled at how different Daniel's teenage years were from his own, how much more integrated and balanced Daniel seemed despite his own challenges. One evening, when Daniel was 15, they were having dinner as a family when Daniel asked Marcus, "Dad, do you ever regret how much of your life you spent on math? Like, you were basically working all the time when you were my age. Do you wish you'd done more normal teenager things?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "It's complicated," he said. "I don't regret pursuing mathematics, it's given me so much, and I think it's what I was meant to do with my mind. But I do wish I'd been better at balance, that I'd learned earlier that being a whole person matters as much as being a successful mathematician. I want something different for you. I want you to pursue what you're passionate about, but not at the expense of everything else. I want you to have adventures and make mistakes and fall in love and stay up late talking with friends about ideas that probably aren't that important but feel crucial in the moment. Success isn't just about achievement, it's about living a full life." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "I think I understand. You're saying I shouldn't just focus on one thing, even if I'm good at it?" "I'm saying that you're more than any one thing you're good at," Marcus replied. "That's something I'm still learning." At 45, Marcus published a book that synthesized much of his thinking from the past decade. It was called The Power of Pattern: How Mathematical Thinking Can Change Your Life and Change the World. The book was unusual for a mathematician of his stature. It wasn't a textbook or a technical monograph but a popular book for general readers. Marcus wrote about his own journey, about the nature of intelligence and giftedness, about how mathematical ways of thinking could be applied to everyday problems and major social challenges. He wrote about pattern recognition, about the beauty of elegant solutions, about the importance of rigorous thinking in an age of misinformation. The book became a bestseller, reaching an audience far beyond the academic world. Marcus did book tours, appeared on podcasts and television shows, became something of a public intellectual. Not all of his mathematics colleagues approved. There was still a sense in some quarters that serious mathematicians should stay in their ivory towers, that popularization was beneath them. But Marcus received thousands of emails and messages from readers telling him how the book had changed their perspective, had helped them think differently about problems in their own lives, had inspired young people to pursue mathematics or science. One message particularly moved him. It was from a teenager in rural Mississippi, a girl named Jasmine who came from a poor family and attended an underfunded public school. She wrote, "I always thought math was just boring rules to memorize, but your book showed me it's about seeing patterns and solving puzzles. I'm good at that. I never thought someone like me could be a mathematician, but now I'm going to try. Thank you for writing a book that makes me feel like I could belong in your world." Marcus arranged for Jasmine to attend his summer program at Stanford the following year, full scholarship provided. She thrived there, and Marcus became her mentor, helping her navigate applications to colleges, writing recommendations, providing encouragement and guidance. Watching Jasmine develop her mathematical abilities, seeing her confidence grow, Marcus felt he was completing a circle, passing on what had been given to him by Dr. Vasquez and others who had believed in his potential. At 46, Marcus faced a health scare of his own. He had been experiencing persistent headaches and vision problems. After several tests and an MRI, doctors found a benign brain tumor, a meningioma that needed to be removed. The surgery was relatively routine, with high success rates, but any brain surgery carries risks. Marcus faced the prospect of his own mortality in a way he hadn't before. He was only 46, with so much he still wanted to do, and the thought that it might all end was terrifying. The night before the surgery, Marcus couldn't sleep. Alex lay beside him, and they talked quietly about their life together, about Daniel, about what mattered most. Marcus made Alex promise that if something went wrong, if Marcus ended up incapacitated, Alex wouldn't let him exist in some diminished state. Alex cried and made Marcus promise to fight to come back to them, to not give up. Daniel, 16 now and old enough to understand the risks, came into their room at midnight and climbed into bed between them like he used to do when he was little. The three of them lay there together until dawn, no one sleeping, just being present with each other. The surgery went well. The tumor was successfully removed, and Marcus woke up in recovery with his mental faculties intact, his vision normal, his headaches gone. The recovery period was challenging. He had to take several months off work, had to be patient with his healing brain, had to accept help and limitation in ways that were difficult for someone used to being independent and capable. But the experience changed him. He emerged from it with a deeper appreciation for the fragility of life, for the preciousness of each day, for the importance of spending his time on things that truly mattered. At 47, Daniel graduated from high school and prepared to start college at NYU, where he planned to study film and psychology. Marcus and Alex helped him move into his dorm in Manhattan, feeling the bittersweet mixture of pride and loss that all parents feel when their children leave home. Daniel had grown into a remarkable young man, kind, creative, emotionally intelligent in ways that neither Marcus nor Alex could quite take credit for. He had taken his difficult start in life and transformed it into empathy and insight. After they said goodbye to Daniel at his dorm, Marcus and Alex walked through Central Park, holding hands, talking about this new phase of their lives. They were empty nesters now. It was just the two of them again, as it had been before Daniel. They could travel more, have more spontaneity in their lives, focus on their own relationship and interests. It felt like both an ending and a beginning. Marcus was 48 when he received an unexpected email from Bernard, the old chess player from Golden Gate Park. Bernard was 93 now and in failing health. He wrote to Marcus asking if he might visit him one last time. Marcus flew to San Francisco immediately and went to the nursing home where Bernard was living. The old man was frail, but his mind was still sharp, his eyes still bright with intelligence. They talked for hours, reminiscing about their chess games from decades ago, about Marcus's childhood, about the journey Marcus had taken since then. Bernard told Marcus that teaching him chess all those years ago had been one of the great joys of his own life, that watching Marcus's career from afar had filled him with pride. "You know," Bernard said, "I've taught chess to thousands of people over my life. But you were special, Marcus. Not just because of your talent, but because you had genuine love for the game, for the beauty of it. That's what I hoped you'd find in mathematics too, not just success, but beauty and joy." Marcus held the old man's hand and told him how much their Sunday chess games had meant to him, how Bernard had been the first person outside his family to really see him and value him. Bernard died 2 weeks later, and Marcus spoke at his memorial service, telling stories about the chess games in the park, about the gift Bernard had given him by taking a 7-year-old boy seriously and teaching him that there was beauty in patterns and logic. At 49, Marcus took stock of his life as he approached his 50th birthday. He had achieved things beyond his childhood dreams: a Fields Medal, groundbreaking research, a successful book, a research center making real impact. He had a loving marriage that had lasted nearly 2 decades. He had raised a son who was finding his own path in the world. He had contributed to his field and tried to use his platform to make the world slightly better. But he had also learned hard lessons. He had learned that intelligence alone doesn't ensure happiness or meaning. He had learned that success can be hollow if it's not rooted in genuine values and connections with others. He had learned that being exceptional is both a gift and a burden, that it creates distance even as it creates opportunity. He had learned that the most important things in life, love, compassion, courage, integrity, can't be reduced to equations or solved like mathematical problems. Marcus thought about the boy he had been, sitting on the kitchen floor watching his mother's feet, already seeing patterns in everything around him. That boy had been brilliant but lonely, gifted but uncertain of his place in the world. Marcus wished he could go back and tell that boy that it would be okay, that the path would be difficult but ultimately rewarding, that his differences would become his strengths, that he would find people who loved him for who he was, not just for what he could do. He thought about his parents, both gone now, who had sacrificed so much to give their children opportunities. He thought about all the teachers and mentors who had believed in him and guided him. He thought about the failures and setbacks that had been as instructive as the successes. He thought about Alex and Daniel, his chosen family, who had taught him how to love and be loved. He thought about the students he had mentored, the young minds he had helped shape, the next generation who would carry forward the work he cared about. As Marcus approached his 50th birthday, he was working on what he considered his most important project yet. Not a mathematical proof or a research paper, but a comprehensive initiative to reform mathematics education to be more inclusive, more focused on problem solving and creativity rather than rote memorization, more connected to real-world applications. He was using his influence and resources to push for systemic change, working with school districts and education policy makers across the country. The work was slow and often frustrating. Changing systems is much harder than solving mathematical problems. There's no elegant proof, no moment of breakthrough where everything suddenly becomes clear. But Marcus had learned patience. He had learned that lasting impact often comes from steady, persistent effort rather than brilliant flashes of insight. He had learned that using his gifts to help others develop their own potential was more satisfying than any personal achievement. On Marcus's 50th birthday, Alex threw him a surprise party at their home in Menlo Park. The house was filled with people who had been part of Marcus's journey, colleagues from Stanford, former students, friends from his MIT and Princeton days, Daniel home from NYU, Lily visiting from DC, Jasmine from Mississippi who was now a sophomore at MIT studying mathematics. Sarah Goldstein gave a toast, telling stories about young Marcus from their days in the gifted program, making everyone laugh. Dr. Vasquez, now in her 80s, spoke about the quiet boy who had walked into her classroom decades ago and who had exceeded even her highest hopes for him. Marcus stood before this roomful of people who had shaped him and whom he had shaped, And he felt something he had spent much of his life seeking, a sense of completeness, of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because he had achieved great things, though he had. Not because he was exceptional, though he was. But because he had learned, slowly and with difficulty, how to be fully human, how to use his gifts in service of something beyond himself, how to connect with others despite his differences, how to find meaning not just in intellectual achievement but in love and service and contribution. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he looked around the room at all these faces, old and young, people from every phase of his life. He thought about what he wanted to say, how to sum up 50 years of living, of being brilliant and broken and human. In the end, he kept it simple. When I was young, Marcus said, I thought that being special meant being apart from other people, that my gifts made me different in ways that would always create distance. I spent years trying to figure out where I fit, whether I should hide my abilities or flaunt them, whether being smart was a gift or a curse. What I've learned over these 50 years is that none of us fits perfectly anywhere. We're all different, all unique, all trying to find our place. The question isn't whether you're special, everyone is special in some way. The question is, what will you do with whatever gifts you have? Will you use them to separate yourself from others or to serve others? Will you let them isolate you or connect you to something larger than yourself? He paused, his voice catching with emotion. I'm grateful for my abilities, for the opportunities they've created. But I'm more grateful for all of you, for everyone who has helped me understand that being brilliant matters less than being kind, that solving problems matters less than loving people, that achieving success matters less than living with integrity and purpose. If I've done anything meaningful in my 50 years, it's not the theorems I've proved or the awards I've won. It's the relationships I've built, the students I've mentored, the small ways I've tried to make the world a little bit better. That's what I want the next 50 years to be about, if I'm lucky enough to have them. There was a long silence after Marcus finished speaking, and then applause, and then people coming up to hug him, to tell him how much he meant to them. Alex held him close and whispered, I'm so proud of who you've become. Daniel, taller than Marcus now, told his dad that he hoped he could live with as much purpose and integrity. And Marcus, surrounded by love and connection, felt something he hadn't fully felt since childhood, that perfect clarity of being exactly who you are, without apology or pretense, knowing that you are enough. The party went late into the night, with laughter and stories and the warmth of human connection that no mathematical equation could ever capture or explain. And when everyone had finally left and Marcus and Alex were cleaning up together in their kitchen, moving in those familiar rhythms of long partnership, Marcus thought, this is it. This is what it's all for. Not the achievements or the accolades, but these moments of simple, profound connection. These ordinary miracles of love and friendship and shared human experience. At 50 years old, Marcus Chen was finally at peace with being extraordinary. Not because he had stopped being brilliant, his mind was as sharp and insightful as ever. But because he had learned that brilliance is just one way of being in the world, neither better nor worse than kindness or courage or compassion, just different. He had learned that the patterns he saw so clearly in mathematics existed in human relationships too, in the rhythms of daily life, in the way that love and loss and joy and suffering all weave together into the complex, messy, beautiful pattern of a life fully lived. And so Marcus moved forward into the next chapter of his life, no longer the child prodigy or the young genius, but simply a man who had been given certain gifts and was doing his best to use them well, who had made mistakes and learned from them, who had achieved great things and understood their limitations, who had found love and meaning and purpose not in spite of his exceptional abilities but through learning to see them as just one part of a much larger, more complex, more fundamentally human story. The story of Marcus Chen, from his childhood in San Francisco's Chinatown to his 50th birthday celebration, was the story of someone learning to be both brilliant and human, learning that these things are not contradictory but complementary, that the highest achievement is not solving the hardest problems but living with wisdom and compassion and integrity, that the greatest gift is not intelligence but the choice to use whatever gifts you have in service of something larger and more lasting than yourself.
Listening and watching the audiobook, please like and subscribe the channel for more updates from the Quiet Mind 18 channel. Thanks for your love and support.